So, people try to put things in containers. And fortunately, the Spirit, interchangeably known as the divine or the holy or the sacred, the Spirit has a way of wiggling out of just about every container or every box we have, even if they are extraordinarily beautiful, like this great meeting room and this great building. The Spirit has a way of showing up and wiggling out of here as well. The temple that the Jews built in Jerusalem was widely perceived as a beautiful, holy container, and it is still so considered. And then, of course, there's the fighting that goes on around it. In case you haven't noticed, one of the real reasons we do not have peace on earth is that 3 different religions are fighting with each other, reminding me ever so much as three congregations in New Haven, Connecticut, who managed to get themselves on the front page of the New Haven Register, saying that, in fact, after 2 years of talking about merging, because all of the congregations were under 100 people, they decided not to merge because they didn't trust each other, causing one person to write a letter to the editor or the Register and say, if you guys don't trust each other, you want me to come and join you? So there's the Mount of Jerusalem, and there's New Haven, Connecticut, and of course there's also us. People have a way of believing that religion is permanent and unchanging and eternal. We build monuments to contain this thought, and they inevitably and predictably fail us. We do this with our houses and our jobs and our relationships as well. We marry for eternity, often with an imagination that our beloved will never bore us or bother us or get varicose veins or go bald. I can just imagine the agonizing conversations that people are having in England right now as they begin to understand that their apartment burnt to the ground. All of a sudden, they went to sleep and they woke up and it was gone. Can't you just hear their conversations saying what you or I would say? What happened? How did that happen? Who am I now? What about my stuff? Who am I without my stuff? And of course, I've got to be somebody without my stuff, without my temple, without my container around me. Who am I without my wardrobe, or my watch, or my computer? Did I really lose everything in that fire? And is it possible to really lose everything? What happens to a person when the container doesn't provide containment? When things spill out of it? Surely people assure each other that they are not their possessions, and they're not their apartment, and they're not their wardrobe, that there is life after the body burns. And good theology supports that fundamental confidence that we are without all that stuff around us. And bad theology certainly undermines that confidence. So Jesus takes a pretty strong swipe at the theology of the temple in our text today. He really doesn't like temples. What he says is, don't trust them. And he goes on to say that I, Jesus, am going to knock them down. And then I'll build them back up, but I'm first going to knock them down. Even I, the one to whom you assign holiness, will destroy the temple, and I'll build it back in 3 days. Even I will change. Especially I cannot be contained. This theology should help the progressive denominations of our day as we watch one church building after another sell its air rights, become a restaurant, or a luxury apartment building. Here in New York City, where these trends prevail. Outside of the city, the same trend is different uses of church buildings, but more often than not, they're just left abandoned in the town square. The downtown left, the church people left, and there sits a building that literally is crumbling before your very eyes. Deferred maintenance has caught up with many declining congregations, the ones that built large physical plants in the 50s, only to see them empty 5 decades later. When I say caught up, I mean that the size of congregations got smaller and the building's needs got larger, and that gap is now as wide as it possibly can be. And hidden in plain sight, we are going to see church buildings abandoned or sold to developers. The gap is too large. So we're watching an extraordinary moment in mainline Christianity, one in which buildings are being destroyed. Now, destroyed is a big word. What I mean is that buildings are being passively destroyed, not actively destroyed. They were destroyed when the congregations went into decline, and now it's finally catching up with people. When the buildings were built, it was assumed that large congregations would be a permanent feature on the religious landscape. They'd just always be the same. People would always come to church. They'd always have children. The children would spend their life in Sunday school, and they would learn the faith. It would take a whole lifetime to learn the faith that was in that Christian container. And neither of these assumptions proved true. They just didn't prove true, and then there was also a declining birth rate among that group of people. So the buildings and their size and their location in the middle of downtowns, which also disappeared, have been rendered dysfunctional. And one of the better uses of that word, they were built for a function which no longer exists. So they will either die, as in be torn down, or sold, or adapted for different uses. This fact is so hidden in plain sight that developers all over this great city are figuring it out. They're actively buying churches. And developers aren't the only ones noticing. Church people are agonizing over it, and temples are agonizing over it, and creative people are finding more comfort than ever in Jesus' original theology of the building. Jesus was always warning about the building. He said that we were a treasure in earthen vessels and that he found the building container too small for the gospel. The fundamental issue, of course, is about God being gone for people, not the congregation or the buildings. But for today, let me stick to what Jesus said about temples. Here at Judson, we have enjoyed this theology for our few decades on the planet. We have refused to colonize space. We do think of this space as sacred. We call it a sanctuary sometimes and a meeting room most of the time. We expect the divine to meet us here, and we have refused to act as though this space was our own. We often benedict ourselves by saying that this service is over and the real service is about to begin, and that the real service goes outside and comes inside, that we have a flow and a flux to this space. Better put, we think that outside and inside are both holy places. We don't think that we sense the divine on Sundays so we can make more money on Mondays. We don't do the bricks and mortars or sacred space and real estate game in a contained way. We got the gist of Mark 13. We believe in Sir Toby and not Malvolio. We believe that people will have drinks inappropriately in places where they shouldn't have drinks. We know that beer and laughter will always find a way to escape the boundaries we make. So we're really upset when somebody pees in the elevator, which they do, or throws up in the bathroom, or yells at another guest because they have overstayed their time. An apology has been issued to the West Village Chorale because, of course, this happened if you put enough people in the same building. If the West Village Chorale wants to sing just a second longer than usual, the actors downstairs want to come up and curse them out. These are some of the interesting consequences of a building that is overused. It happens. Some of us get upset if a flag is burned in this space, and others get upset if a flag is not burned in this space. But most of us would agree that the sacred and the secular talk to each other here. We kind of sort of know what Jesus meant about destroying the temple and building it in 3 days. We also kind of sort of know what Jesus was hinting at, that he and his Spirit refuse containment. They intend to be fundamentally elusive and will not permit captivity for themselves, even in the most beautiful cathedral. So, Gaudi's cathedral cannot contain the gospel. Neither can Chartres. Neither can St. Patrick's. Neither can Judson. We sort of kind of know this. But what does it mean to us? In our Bricks and Mortals project, we are trying to know this truth better and trying to see the truth of containers outside of a binary as something that comes together, that spiritual and secular space coexist. We even have a space use policy, not outer space, but space use policy here. It's such interesting language. And we have all sorts of exceptions to it. We want to maximize the rental and maximize the mission. And if there's one thing that creates staff and board and congregational conflict, it is that balance. We hold the balance lightly as people who simply are stewards of this space for our lifetime, but we have to hold the balance. We remove the pews so that this sacred space could be constantly re-sacralized, even at the risk of desacralizing it. We are a tad arrogant about this decision, or at least I am. I like being able to brag about our adaptive removal of the pews. I like being able to brag about the asset and the deficit of deferred maintenance, because it allows us to be different than many congregations who live on stale money of their endowments. It allows us to be fluid. It scares us often enough that we can imagine this building not being here. In fact, Ted and Betty are working on a cartoon that will show what New York City will look like when the buildings, the sacred buildings, are shuttered. That is not an impossible picture of a future in New York City. It's impossible for Judson Memorial Church, but it's not impossible at all. So our theology and our use of space is consonant in a world of great inconsistency about this matter. So what would this mean, this theology that's beyond binary, that merges sacred and secular, body and spirit? What would it mean for you as a person? What if your body was a temple and that it couldn't really contain your soul? What would that mean? Jesus does go exactly there. He says that our bodies and our spirits are both temples. He says it over and over, and a lot of people think that this is what Paul was mostly talking about. So you might want to think of a few crazy ideas and hear these hymns differently. You might want to read a paper written by a woman named Lily Zhang from the Mountains and Sacred Landscapes Conference. Get ready for some funky language. I died laughing when I read this because of the academic nature of it. The blurb is Zhang problematizes the ideas of purity and timelessness in the conservation narratives of sacred groves. Why problematize purity and timelessness? Because they're the source of the spiritual abuse. The temple, statically perceived, is the source of spiritual abuse. And our mission here is to heal people from spiritual abuse and to give them spiritual support. In the name of a God we can't ever say is true, but is just close enough to understand. What Zhang argues is that nature's main game is fluctuation, adaptation, evolution, seasons, hybridization. That nature, you may want to have a really great pagan theology, but the second you turn that into concrete, it's going to be as bad as Christianity, which is almost all concrete right now. So why is flow a great main game for you? Here's why. Attachment to any one building or apartment or city or church building can be beautiful if it flows through you, and it can be oppressive to you if you lack a sense of flow. You will unnecessarily fear death, your own and that of others. You'll get stuck in a rut instead of being fluid in a fountain. You will become self-centered in a way that won't allow you a vibrant curiosity about other people, which curiosity will rob you of the Jesus way, that great personal rock and foundation that tells us just love your neighbors as yourself and get over it. You'll live scared that your own apartment might burn down and that you won't know what to do without your stuff or your clothes. You will not have that kind of core that allows you to withstand loss, which is inevitable. Having a center that is larger than a building or a culture or a shell or a skin is oddly self-protective, especially if you want to have a large self. Now listen, we're going to sing The Church is One Foundation. Get ready. Some of you know it. But just remember how it goes. The church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ, her Lord. She is the consummation of truth forevermore. From heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride, and with his blood he brought her, and for her life he died. Now that's dusty stuff. It's almost as wild as built on the rock the church does stand, even if steeples are falling. That's dusty stuff. But note that we weren't the first people to need to understand that we are mortals dealing with bricks, and that the theological solution to that conundrum, that growing conundrum, is to let the Spirit out of the container and not hold on too tight. Amen.